Yo! How's it going? I promise I'm not a hack, but we are entering a new year, 2025. It's February now, so I guess not entering anymore, but whatever, right? New year, trying to grow the channel. It's not going great. It has been a tough climb, my friends, but we're trying out some new content. I'm not just doing tier lists, but I know doing replays over and over again isn't getting much growth, so we're gonna try diversifying our content. And Strat came up with an idea. Strat is a patron and a good bro. Strat came up with an idea that I should rank every unit type in the game. Now what that means will be a little clearer in a second here, but yeah, it is a good idea. It's gonna be 3, 6, 9, 12. That'll be 12 videos, right? So you have all of them right here. We're going to split it up in 12 videos, but we have artillery, which we'll probably be starting with today. Chariots, ranged infantry, like Skaven weapons teams or archers or things like that. We have heavy infantry, medium infantry, light infantry, large monsters, monsters infantry, heavy cav, war beasts, light cav, and skirmish units. Right. Let's get on with it. Giant boom booms, artillery. Some of them are going to be monstrous artillery, but all these things are artillery. Now, how the ranking works is, let's pretend, you know how Demons of Chaos works? There's one big demonic faction, right? That demonic faction has every demon unit on it. We're going to take that, we're going to make one faction for the entire game. This faction has every unit on it. And now we're going to rank these artillery units by how often you would see them on this faction with every unit in the whole game on it, right? So S tier is every time you want artillery, you'll take this artillery. A tier, it works. It's not as optimal as the S tier, but you can still take it. You're not trolling. B tier, it's niche. This is going to be a little different than our other tier list. B is going to be niche. Niche, useful, not useful in every matchup. C is... it's not optimal. You're kind of being funny. You might just be trying to make a good replay and using a niche unit and being like, haha, look, I'm using this unit no one uses. D tier is absolute trash. You're fucking trolling if you take this unit on this broad roster that has everything in it, right? Right. So we're ranking them against each other. All right, so let's get started. First up, the Bone Giant of the Tomb Kings. I'm going to put him in A to start off. I don't think you'd want to take him in every matchup. Versus somebody else who has every unit in the game, right? But the Bone Giant's good. Very good at putting constant damage on large targets, decent at poking cavalry, very good at dueling other artillery, particularly artillery with models like cannons or mortars or whatnot. Good at taking out those models, making the artillery less effective at firing back at him. So he's very good. The main problem is he's a bad duelist, which he's an artillery unit, so who cares? But I'm just saying, if another single entity gets onto him, he won't have a good time. And getting surrounded by small infantry also is pretty bad for him, so he trades down to those things. But, you know, he's good. He's good at scoot and shoot, moving around, firing. Not as much dodging, but just getting out of bad situations as people slowly pull away from him. So, yeah. Bone Giant's great. A, solid. Skaven Warp Lightning Cannons. I'll go with B, because this isn't the Regiment of Renown. The Regiment of Renown bumps up to an A or even S tier, but the basic Warp Lightning Cannons, they're just niche. If you have every artillery in the game on your roster, it's hard to justify taking these guys over, like, a Dwarf Cannon, but, they're solid. They do okay into other artillery duels. They do okay into cavalry. They're fine. I think the only reason you'd want them and why I put them in B instead of C, because B is niche, is they do magic damage. So they're better than dwarf cannons or empire cannons versus like demons, demonic units, demonic cavalry, demonic flying units. Like, they're B. They're solid. No real complaints. It's just there's other cannons that are going to do that job better. Plague Claw Catapults are going to go in C for below niche, but not quite full trolling. There's just not a lot of use cases for the Plague Claw Catapult, unfortunately. Its discourage debuff, plus just being shot up by artillery, provides really nice double debuffs for leadership. But it is kind of cheesy, and also the problem with fighting low leadership factions with catapult type units is there's no follow-up. Like, the easiest way to deal with low leadership factions is to just surround them and charge them with like light cavalry or use spells or something. So you'd have to follow up with light cav to run down anything you routed, and that's just a lot of effort that usually doesn't end up being worth it, because then you're spending a lot of money to just route usually low leadership shitty things. I don't know. Plycal Catapult doesn't have enough redeeming qualities versus non-low leadership factions, and even versus low leadership factions doesn't do enough raw damage to really be worth taking, unfortunately. So it's just kind of meh, extremely situational, and even then there's usually better options. If you're not actively trolling, they're not terrible, they're just bad. Bo Stegadon, let's put you in B. I do think you're more niche than the Bone Giant. You're not as good or as reliable at sniping out other artillery models, so you lose a lot of artillery duels with Stegadon unless you can get in range of those things, and then you'll do kind of okay. Usually paired with healing support. Really doesn't do that much damage versus cavalry. Doesn't do that much damage versus single entities, but the only reason that this isn't down in the C or D tier is because it's on a Stegadon. And Stegadons, compared to the Bone Giant, are fantastic melee combatants. Like, very, very good in melee. A little pricey, but still, they can hold their own against non-armor-piercing cavalry, and even versus armor-piercing cavalry, they'll make them pay for it. Can charge through infantry, provide terror, all that stuff. So, as a hybrid artillery piece, it's B, it's niche. It's good versus factions that don't have a lot of armor-piercing missiles in return. So, yeah, Bowstake's fine. B. Solar Engine. That's gonna go in B, A, B, B. A. B. B. It's niche still. A lot of the positives I have to say about the Stegadon, I can say about this guy too. Great melee, very tanky, causes terror, can charge through infantry, and cavalry have a hard time killing him when they surround him. The only reason I was flirting with A, but I couldn't bring myself to bring him to A just because his damage is very low. Solar Engine damage is extremely low. It's more of a support artillery than a true artillery. True artillery is generally like, if someone's trying to kite you, they have to come in and kill the artillery before they can resume kiting you. You can actually just ignore the Solar Engine. Like, you could just kite. If you have triple Way Watchers, don't even waste your ammo on the Solar Engine. Just shoot everything else and accept the moderate to mild damage he's going to deal back to you. But to keep him out of C and D tier, the melee stuff we talked about, but also his little solar beam is amazing at debuffing. It provides that minus 24/24 melee attack and melee defense. So you generally want to use him to support cav fights from afar, secure your self-mobile advantage, maybe hit the enemy lord while a lord duel is going on to make your lord win. He's just a good supportive guy. So you really, like, the low damage hurts him on this tier list, but it doesn't doom him because that doesn't seem to be his function. So a tanky support unit that is hard to shut down, but not that threatening. B tier. Bolt Throwers, Eagle Claws. That is a C. D. Got it. Okay. Now, High Elf mains are going to get mad at me. On the High Elf roster, it's not D tier because it's necessary. But when we're ranking it against all the other artillery in the game, that's very different. If you had access to all the artillery in the game, I'm also going to grab you, Dark Elf Bolt Thrower. If you had access to all the artillery in the game, there is no reason ever at all to take the Bolt Throwers. They are terrible. Their DPS is super low. Their range isn't that crazy that it's worth taking them. Their spread shot is neat, but there's other artillery. There's honestly other single shot artillery that still does more damage to infantry than the Elven Bolt Throwers multi-shot. The single shot is decent for poking down stuff, but like, it's kind of trying to be the jack of all trades, and it's not. It's the 6 of diamonds, and that's all it is. It's very underwhelming. They just serve a niche on their roster to be artillery on rosters that don't have artillery. But if you had any other choice of artillery, you wouldn't pick these fucking things. Ancient Salamander, I'm going to put in C. I might just be a hater. I know there's a lot of Lizardman mains that love this thing. The Ancient Salamander has some of the positives of the Stegadon and the Solar Engine, but not as many. It can't kill nearly as many infantry as those two. It is not nearly as tanky in infantry as those two. It's very squishy when hit by cavalry. It's still very squishy when shot at by archers. And then the DPS isn't really there. It has similar DPS to the Stegadon. Now, where the Stegadon should be shooting at cav or other single entities or artillery, the Salamander should be shooting at infantry and maybe cav blobs. I get that they're fighting different things, but it's still like for all the downsides of this unit and a decently high price point, it's not like when you get a shot in, you fucking feel it. Oh my god, it did it. It's amazing. It's like, oh, okay, that was a decent shot. Yeah. It's just pretty bad. Now, it's not trolling. It's not D tier. It just requires a lot of micro for very little reward when there's other options in the artillery tier list that are going to do better. But I think the thing that keeps it out of D tier is it is fast. So at least you can move it. You can dodge enemy counter shots. You can get it to a safer position, while the bolt throwers, to compare them to a D tier, bolt throwers are stationary artillery. So they need to put out a lot of damage, because when they get overrun, they're fucked. And they don't do that. At least a Salamander can just run away. Necrofex Colossus. Honestly, I've been warming up to this guy, but I'm going to put him in C. Compared to all other artillery. Yeah, okay. Compared to all other artillery, it's in C, because you're going to have to take a healer to heal this up. Now, on the roster he's on, he usually has an Invocation to Heckcaster. I get it. And we're not talking about Noctilus's mount. That's another thing, is people might be like, well, Noctilus's mount is pretty good. That's B or A. True, but that has Noctilus on it. When you're taking the Necrofex Colossus, the standalone Necrofex Colossus, you are also taking a different Lord. So Noctilus, with the Necrofex Colossus, you give your healing Lord caster hybrid guy a higher HP pool, higher mobility, and then his heals on himself are that much more effective, and I think it's a bit cheaper than taking Noctilus and the Necrofex Colossus separate, right? So you get a lot more out of Noctilus than the Necrofex Colossus. When you're thinking of this one, think of Foot Noctilus, and separately, you bought a Necrofex Colossus before you get mad at my C tier. It's a Bone Giant, but the Bone Giant does more single entity damage, whereas this does more multi-entity damage. The problem is it comes with all the negatives of the Bone Giant for very few upsides. Like, it still loses in infantry when it's surrounded. It's still a terrible duelist. It doesn't like being surrounded by cav either. It's weak to other artillery counterfiring it, but whereas the Bone Giant can defeat the artillery that is shooting at him and then be safe, the Necrofex Colossus needs someone else to kill the artillery shooting at it. And then it's also weak to archers. Its spread shot is pretty good against spread out infantry or cavalry, but it's just too niche and too expensive and hard to protect. And his large HP pool is nice, but he's actually pretty squishy once archers start shooting at him. So Necrofex Colossus is just C tier. The only positives I have to say about him is he has actually pretty high damage output versus cavalry, and like the Salamander, he can scoot and shoot quite nicely. He's pretty fast for a big boy. Vampire Coast Mortars. I'll put you in B. Specialized versus infantry and archers, but they're insanely low price point, and being undead makes them unbreakable, so they won't rout quickly. They do crumble, but at least they won't rout from being spooked. These mortars will do fine. For killing infantry, which is their whole job, they do solid. Good range, cheap price point, no complaints. I put them in B because it's niche, because you need to just be shooting at other... You need to be fighting a faction that has tightly packed infantry that are worth shooting with a mortar. So that's why it's in B and not A. It's niche. Vampire Coast Carronade. I'm going to put you in C. C in the scope of artillery, because compared to other artillery that is in the game, the Carronade is not very good. It's the cheapest of the straight shot cannon variants, but it's not cheap enough for how much worse than the other straight shot cannon variants there are in the game. So toe-to-toe, it just doesn't match up. It loses most artillery duels with Dwarves, Empire, and Grand Cathay cannons. They're very squishy. Their accuracy versus single entities is not commendable. They do okay versus cav. They do dog shit versus infantry. It's not great. Now, it's in C and not D because there's just... It is cheaper. It's like, yeah, you're paying less, you're getting less. I get it. It just doesn't quite fall down to D, but it's not great. C. You shouldn't take it, but you're not trolling. Scream Skull Catapult. This is the first one I'm going to put back up in A. It's been a while. This might take some heat. Screaming Skull Catapult is everything the Plague Claw Catapult wishes it was, but Unbreakable Crew is nice. Does a bit more damage in my experience, also is a bit more accurate in my experience. And they're undead, they're unbreakable. Are their price points similar? I think they're similar, or the Screaming Skull is cheaper. I believe. Plus, the audio on it is cool. The animations are cool. Rule of cool. Very good catapult. Great at taking out archers. Great at taking out tightly packed heavy infantry. Similar job function to a mortar, just a bit more of a straightforward line of fire. Casket of Souls. A tier. A tier artillery. Really good at punishing blobs of cavalry or infantry after a melee fight forms. Single entity, so it has a little bit of scoot and shoot, and it also has a little known passive that provides more Winds of Magic recharge rate, which is quite nice. And I think it's only $12.50. It's not cheap, but it does a lot for its price point. The only thing it is really weak to is getting surrounded in melee, obviously, and other artillery does a lot of damage to it. So if you're going to take it, you need to take something that can shut down enemy artillery. But after that, you can protect him quite nicely with skeletons. And keep him online, keep him firing. He'll generally do good. And the closer you get to the casket, the more accurate it gets. So unless someone gets directly on top of it, if they get into mid or short range but don't actually get to it, they're going to take a walloping. Casket's pretty good compared to other artillery. It just doesn't kill enemy artillery that well. Greenskin rock lobbers. D tier, absolute trash. If you're taking a catapult, you should take any other type of catapult. And again, this isn't a build guide, because you might be like, well, the greenskins don't have other catapults. Doesn't matter. I'm comparing it against every other artillery in the game, and this one sucks. Lower damage than the Plague Claw and Screaming Skull catapults, lower accuracy, mildly lower price point, but not that low. I think these things are still 600 gold to miss everything constantly. They just suck. They do no damage to anyone. They are terrible. And they're greenskin stuff, so they'll rout at the first sign of trouble. The ROR is pretty good. The ROR provides the same debuff as the Solar Engine. This one does not. This one sucks. Doom Diver Catapult. I will put it in C tier just because of the sheer amount of fucking pressure people are going to put on me if I put it in D tier. But just so you know, in my heart of hearts, this shit's D. The Doom Diver Catapult, in theory, can hit large targets relatively frequently, do a lot of damage, and knock them out. It can be good at sniping single entities, and that is about it. Several people have sworn by the Doom Diver catapults. I think they suck. I think they're the worst thing in the world. Every time I take them, they miss everything. Someone told me to take 3 versus the Tomb Kings because it snipes out the cats. I had Cetra the Imperishable fighting against Gorbad Ironclaw, so I was holding him in place. He sat perfectly still. 3 Doom Divers fired a volley at him. 1 out of the 12 little goblin flyers hit that fucking thing. I hate them. But yes, people have sent me replays where all of the goblins hit and then they do good damage, but it's way too RNG. So if you're taking this, you're just playing Rolling Dice Simulator and hoping you get 6s. I hate them. They're terrible. Empire Mortar, C tier. Everything nice I had to say about the Vampire Coast Mortar applies to these, and they're not undead, so they will break. I think they cost the same, or the Vampire Coast is a little cheaper. Mortars just, they're fine. They're okay. There's better artillery in the game, so I'm not going to rank them very highly. They hit tightly clustered archers and infantry. They do fine. Luminarch! We'll put it in A as far as other artillery goes. It's not the Temple off Luminarch, so it doesn't have its own net, but Luminarchs are very strong. They don't do much damage to... They don't do much damage to cavalry. They don't do much damage to infantry. They do okay. Mostly about killing enemy lord, enemy monsters, any single entities, enemy monstrous infantry, enemy monstrous cavalry, enemy artillery. You want to find something big and expensive and shoot the shit out of it with a Luminarch. Don't use it on cheap infantry or cheap cavalry. But when you target something correctly, the Luminarch is amazing. It can move pretty fast as it's a chariot. Can dodge a lot of enemy fire in between its shots. When it is shooting, it has a long windup, so it can't like scoot and shoot that well. But you can move it into some trees until you take out the enemy cannons, then push it back out and snipe stuff. And man, when it hits, it hits. And it's also janky as shit, which is in its favor, because if it hits a chariot model or a model big enough that it can get it hit 1 or 2 or 3 times, it's still 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hits them and instantly deletes some stuff. I know CA said they patched that, but I've still, since that patch, seen it shoot Grom the Paunch, hit the wolf, hit Grom, and then hit the back of his chariot and triple hit him with the Luminarch, and that takes him down to about a 3rd HP. So the Luminarch's insane at sniping out single entities, even though that's all it does. Hellstorm Rocket Battery, not the Regiment of Renown. D. Not the Regiment of Renown is terrible. The basic Hellstorm rocket batteries are some of the worst artillery pieces I've ever seen. They're expensive, they're horribly inaccurate, and sometimes I swear they do less damage to infantry than mortars do. I've seen it. They are like the Doomdiver Catapult, just RNG simulator, but cranked up to 11. These guys miss everything, and even when they hit, they don't do that much damage. Again, not the Sunmaker. Basic Hellstorm rocket batteries. They look cool, and that is about it. They have no positives, in my opinion. Hey, Hellblaster Volley Gun. Also D. Terrible. It is terrible. Short-range artillery that doesn't have an arc of fire. So the only things it can hit are things that are not infantry that get into short range, because when infantry get into short range, they're usually fighting your infantry. So now the Hellblaster can't see them. So it can only see things, infantry in like the last 2 seconds before they hit your front line, or they can see monsters infantry that are fighting in your front line, as long as your front line doesn't have monsters infantry or cavalry supporting it. So as long as you only have short infantry, the Hellblaster can shoot at the tall things over your infantry for a very high price point, and it doesn't even do that much damage. See, you have to set up this perfect situation for it, and then it does okay. It's just not worth it. I've tried using it versus cavalry, but again, the same problem comes up. If your cavalry fight the enemy cavalry, it can't see anything, and even when it fires, it doesn't do that much damage. It's expensive, and it's squishy. It's just terrible. The Hellblaster Volley Gun sucks. Empire Cannon. I'll put it in B. It's fine. It's fine. It's slightly better than the Coast Cannon. It's going to be worse than the Dwarf Cannons and about the same as Grand Cathay Cannons. So it's fine. After they got an update, I think last summer, the Empire Cannons have been doing okay. They got some increased accuracy and calibration stuff, so really solid shots versus other artillery, cavalry, single entities, monstrous infantry, just anything that's not infantry or archers, the cannon will perform pretty well against. It's bog standard mid-tier artillery. Dwarven Organ Gun. Copy paste every single thing I said about the Hellblaster Volley Gun. Give it to the Dwarven Organ Gun. Terrible. Absolute garbage. Grudge Thrower. Copy everything I said about the Greenskin Rock Lava and apply it to this. Garbage. Terrible. Flame Cannon. Garbage and terrible. It does not do a lot of damage. It has a very short range. It does have a bit of an arc of fire, so it's the only thing I can say nice about it over the Organ Gun and the Hellblaster Volley Gun. But it's still terrible. It's an anti-infantry artillery piece that can barely shoot infantry at short range. So if archers get into range of it, if cavalry get into range of it, it's just going to get shut down without dealing much damage in return. I don't know. This thing sucks. And it sucks with the price point. You might be like, well, if there's 2 high elf archers, I can kill 1 high elf archer, and then the other one will kill me. That's a 1-for-1. Dude, this thing's like 1,300 gold. An archer's 450. You'd have to kill 3 archers. Can this kill 3 archers before they get it? No. Yeah. No, it's terrible. Dwarven Cannon. A tier. First Dwarven Artillery to make it out of D tier. We've run into some of the bad ones, but the Dwarven Cannons are the best of the cannons. The Dwarven crew have insanely high leadership, and they're very low to the ground, which makes the crew hard to kill against the Dwarven Cannons. The Dwarven Cannon models themselves also feel a little bit more resilient than the Empire or the Vampire Coast Cannons. That one I don't have proof of, it just feels that way when I get artillery duels and I'm trying to shoot the Dwarf Cannons. They'll still have 3 or 4 models and I'll lose all of mine, and it's like, okay. I also think they have better accuracy stats because they are supposed to be like Dwarven engineered best cannons. So for that, they get up to A. Really solid against other artillery, really solid against everything besides infantry. So yeah, great price point. I think they have spell resistance too because they're Dwarven. Hell Cannon. Hell Cannon's gonna go in B, because B is niche, and they are niche. If your opponent does not have artillery, because the Hell Cannon is very weak to enemy artillery, but if your opponent doesn't have artillery, then it's only weak to archers, and it does moderate damage to everything. There is not a bad target for the Hell Cannon. Homing fireball pops out of it. It does okay damage to big single entities. It does okay damage to small single entities. It does okay damage to cav. It does okay versus infantry. It's great. So you'd only want to take it in matchups where you can guarantee that the enemy doesn't have artillery. And then if you pressure back the archers and just let this thing fire, it'll do great. Bretonnia Trebuchets. C. C, I guess. They're like the rock lava and the dwarven catapult, but I feel like they hit more often and they are cheaper. Well, they're cheaper than the dwarven catapult, I believe, unless that thing's only 600. Still, I feel like the trebs just hit more often, and they also seem to do more damage when they hit. So just more accurate, they are a catapult. I think plague claw catapults are better, and even they are niche, but I still think, like, if you're taking something to kill other infantry and you have every artillery in the game, you should probably aim for the hell cannon or the mortar or the casket or the screaming skull catapult. So it's just not quite in D, but there are a lot of better options. Dwarven bolt thrower is the first S tier. Dwarven bolt thrower, take notes, high elf and dark elf bolt throwers. It has 8 models instead of 4. Its DPS is insane, and the 8 bolt thrower models themselves provide a roadblock that if you get charged in the front by cavalry or infantry, a lot of them just stand around not knowing what to do because they're just stuck on the bolt thrower models, making their crew very hard to kill. They're quite resilient to enemy artillery fire because they have 8 models to churn through while they're firing back. Now, they don't have the best range. They can't usually win artillery duels at range. They have to move into range and then they can win it. But also having 8 bolt thrower models does a lot of damage to cav, single entities. Really anything besides infantry, and then infantry, they're okay. And they have a good arc of fire, so they can usually hit stuff even when it's in melee combat, usually. And they're super cheap, too. I think, I forget what they actually are, so I don't want to, like, misquote it. But they're 800 or lower, and I'm leaning on the lower. Dwarven bolt throwers are insane. They're insane. Cygor! He's gonna go in C. He's a bone giant, but worse. He's better in melee combat than the bone giant or the Necrofex Colossus, but I feel like his projectile is worse than the bone giant or the Necrofex Colossus, so it's kind of a wash. He's a decent in melee single entity that has a rock throw that when it hits does fine damage versus infantry or cavalry, but it misses a lot more than the Bone Giant and a good amount more than the Necrofex Colossus, so he's relying on his melee stats to be relevant at all. If you had other options for artillery, you wouldn't take the Cygor. He's just pretty whatever, but I guess he's a big spooky monster. That's all I can say. Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch. I'll put him in A. I've seen a lot more replays of him recently, and while I'm still not sold that it's a worthwhile thing to take in a Tzeentch build, it is fine compared to other artillery. It takes the Salamander Scoot and Shoot, but upgrades it in like every way. It's squishier than the Salamander, but other than that, its projectile does more damage versus every unit type than the Salamander's does, and the little vortexes that spawn after he shoots are pretty insane. So this thing can usually pay for itself in any matchup as long as it gets maybe 2/3 of its ammo off. Pretty good arc of fire, really good spread after it shoots. Just Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch is quite solid. Iron Blaster. We'll also go in A. I would avoid S tier just because its shotgun type ability is weak to other artillery, and it has to get in range of archers to shoot at them. The Iron Blaster, the only reason it's not in B for me is its insane scoot and shoot capacity. The Iron Blaster is a very responsive chariot, so it's really good at dodging enemy fire if you're microing it appropriately. It does insane damage at close range to any unit type, but close range is the key. This is a shotgun artillery piece. At its maximum range, you will not hit anything. One of its shots will go short, 2 of its shots will go over, like every single time. Do not fire at its max range. Honestly, don't fire at anything above half of its range. And then after it runs out of ammo, it's a decent little chariot that's churning through infantry that you've presumably softened up with the Iron Blaster. So Iron Blaster is good. You just need to protect from enemy artillery, which you can do by dodging, because the Iron Blaster is fast. Scrap Launcher, Noblar Scrap Launcher. This is going to go in B. It's probably second best catapult behind the Scream Skull catapult, in my opinion. And it has a lot of the same positives as an Iron Blaster. It just does damage to infantry and cavalry, but not single entities. Whereas the Iron Blaster can do good damage to single entities. But the Noblar Scrap Launcher, very good scoot and shoot potential, very responsive and fast unit. A little less accurate than the Iron Blaster at a cheaper price point, and not good versus single entities. Otherwise, all the same positive things I had to say about the Iron Blaster. Harpoon Stonehorn. D. C. D. C. I'll put it in C. This one is a terrible artillery unit versus everything. It is hot garbage, its projectile would put it in D tier. The only reason it's in C is because the Stonehorn is a good monster. So you get a terrible artillery unit, but a fine monster. Just, you're going to end up putting this thing in melee. The only time to use its ranged attack is when you're kiting the enemy and they have no capacity to trade back with you. But if they're firing at anything you have and your Stonehorn is firing at them, you're losing that value trade. So you would only turn this thing's fire on when you've whittled them down to just melee units following you around the map. It's pretty terrible at shooting stuff, but a Stonehorn is good. Decent duelist, amazing charge attacks. Little Grum, A tier. Insanely accurate cannonball. Does a lot of damage versus enemy artillery, enemy cavalry, enemy single entities, and does good side shots down infantry. Now he comes at a high price point. He has scoot and shoot, but he's not nearly as quick or responsive as the Exalted Flamer or the Iron Blaster. He can scoot and shoot, but he's not going to dodge anything in time. He's a little janky at moving around. But as a ranged unit, no complaints. I've seen this thing hit like Tzeentch Disc Lords 3 or 4 shots in a row while they're flying around the battlefield. Little Grom is accurate as fuck. He's A tier. He's great. Skull Cannon. I'm going to put you in S. As far as artillery goes, Skull Cannons are amazing. They are specialized to kill just infantry, which should lower them on this list. But their scoot and shoot is the best in the game. They are so fast. They're so responsive. They have amazing charge animations that even if they get hit by cavalry, they're usually charge around enough to stay kind of safe. Now, obviously, if you hit them with the Fireborn, they'll die quickly. But I'm talking about like Illyrian Reavers. They'll survive. The Skull Cannon will survive for quite a long time and even trade back. Really good melee stats. Gets infinite ammunition as long as it can charge in and out of melee. Gets healing when it's in melee. And its shot clears out infantry. This thing will win you a game if the enemy has of 10,000 infantry left, but no archers and no cavalry. You've eliminated those things. This can win you the game. Just scoot and shoot and cycle charge your way through literally infinite infantry. It will win. It leaves a little puddle behind on the ground after the last update too, which kills a lot more infantry more quickly. So it is S tier. It is a very, very insane artillery piece. That like literally only kills infantry, but it's so good at that I still put it in S tier. Grand Cathay Balloon. It is B tier. Moderate damage against infantry and cavalry. Very low potential to duel other artillery. Very low potential to kill single entities. But it is flying, which keeps it actually very safe from a lot of threats. And it has much higher HP than you would guess. I think it has 14,000, if I remember correctly. Maybe it's 12,000, but it's tankier than you would suspect. And since it's flying, it never has line of sight issues. It can always see what it's shooting at and get good shots off. The only reason it's B tier is if your opponent has good artillery or good armor-piercing missiles. It is a bit of a sitting duck. It's very slow and big, but it's good for what it does. Grand Cathay Cannons. I'm going to put them in A tier as well. Nah, B tier, B tier. Okay, here's the thing. The only reason I push them from A to B is they're large. Grand Cathay cannons are large and ornate models, which die very easily to archer fire or enemy cannons. Like, the cannon itself gets hit by a lot of projectiles and breaks easily. A lot of Grand Cathay games end with a cannon crew running around with no cannon models left to fire from. But that's the only negative I have to say about it. At a good price point with harmony bonuses that you'll usually have melee infantry nearby to provide the harmony bonuses, very accurate fire damage, which reduces healing, fire damage cannons that do a lot of damage to large targets, very good. And honestly, these cannons strangely do okay versus infantry. Decent in enemy cannon duels, just that high profile, making them easy to hit and return is the only reason I put them in B and not A. Fire Rain Rocket is D tier. The Grand Cathay Fire Rain Rocket is terrible. I don't know what it is. It's like the Empire Hellstorm Rocket Battery. It's slightly more accurate, but it's just as expensive. It's still very weak to enemy cannons shooting at it. It's still very weak to archers. It's just so fucking inaccurate. Sometimes it'll get that one beautiful volley and do really solid damage, but most of the time it just misses. And then when the melee starts, it can't see anything and it just gets obstructed and sucks. So no, the Fire Rocket blows. Don't take it. The Goblin Hewer. B. They're very niche. Goblin Hewer is a shotgun artillery piece, does a lot of damage to a big target that is close to you, but then it's crewed by Slayers, so if you try and shut it down with light cavalry, they'll trade up and usually actually just fight you off, push you away, and get back on their mount and start shooting. Now, what a lot of people do that think the Goblin Hewer is bad is they'll try and target something far away and let it wander into their front line, or just get frustrated that what you're wandering towards isn't in range, so then you don't shoot at anything and it gets flanked and destroyed. Yeah, don't do that. This thing's only 900 gold. Just turn it at whatever is nearest to it. You don't get to pick the target. You just don't. Like, take that out of your mind. This doesn't pick what it's going to shoot. It shoots whatever happens to come near it. And then I think you'll like the Goblin Hewer much more, because whatever comes near it is going to have a bad fucking time. So, yeah, just don't try and target something. Just shoot something. You'll be fine. Magma Cannon. C. Used to be OP. Now does too little damage. Misses often, doesn't really have a good target, and there's just other artillery that do his job better. I really don't have too much to say about it. It's expensive, it's squishy, it's not great. It's C. I think the only thing that keeps it out of D is when it hits its right target, it does damage. I just think there's a lot of better things here. Speaking of better things, Deathstroke Rocket Launcher. Oh, not the Thunder Tusk. Deathstroke Rocket Launcher. A. Fuck you, Bolt Thrower. The multi-entity shot on this thing is amazing at deleting infantry, and it's straight up and then straight down arc of fire. Means it can usually hit infantry even when they're in melee. It's insanely accurate. It's very powerful. And then its single shot is amazing and pretty hard to dodge against single entities or other artillery. It's only an A and not S because it is expensive, and it has no melee capacity to fight back whatsoever. So if anything catches up to it, this thing will have a bad time. It can't scoot and shoot. It's very slow. But as a stand your ground rocket piece, oh, fantastic. Dreadquake Mortar. That would be S tier with a caveat. The caveat is if you just take the Dreadquake Mortar itself, it's not that great. It's probably B or even C. But the fact that it can get hitched up to an Iron Demon and then be one of the fastest, most destructive chariots in the entire game and a decent duelist while firing at itself in melee, oh, that's S tier for sure. Insane damage versus any multi-entity, and then, like I said, it can be strapped to an Iron Demon and then duel small single entities. The only thing it's consistently weak to is large single entities that can chase it down and do damage to it. But the fact that it can fire at itself and be a chariot means archers that get near, you're probably just going to charge them, get into melee so they can't shoot at you, and then you fire one mortar at yourself, it blows up the archers, and you move on to the next one. It's very, very, very good. It is quite expensive. It's going to be a majority of your army, but it is very good as far as artillery goes. Thunder Tusk, also S tier. Every positive thing I say about the C tier monsters that I'm like, it's a good monster, it's not a great artillery piece, Thunder Tusk says, hey, fuck you, nerd, watch this. It's the best catapult in the game with its homing snowball it summons on its front. So it's the best catapult. The guy on its back throws really good little javelins that do a lot of damage to large targets nearby. It's a great duelist. It's amazing at clearing out infantry with its cycle charging. And it can kite well with its numerous slows. The only downside is its high price point, but it's actually pretty resistant to archers. And this thing is right now the best artillery unit in the game by far. It is way overtuned, and it's definitely some pay-to-win DLC vibes. So yes, best unit in the whole artillery category. Goblin Spear Thrower. That's going to be in D. I wanted to like these guys. They're insanely cheap, and they have 8 models. So you'd think, like, just volume of fire, and if they die, I don't care. But I just haven't noticed them do anything. I kept one alive an entire game firing at Durthu. It was literally just firing at Durthu. And by the time it got shut down, after a 9-minute game, 9 minutes of shooting at Durthu, it got 450 value. And I was like, that's unacceptably bad. And I've tried taking them in a couple things. I've taken them versus Slaanesh. I've taken them versus Tomb Kings. It's just... they just never do anything. And I know they're supposed to be cheap and kind of shitty, but they just don't do enough, so... I don't know. They're D. I don't see a reason to ever bring them, unfortunately. And finally, the Arachnarok Flinga. I'll put it in A. Its little catapult is a good catapult. It hits quite often. And then this thing is an anti-large duelist monster if you get close to it. The only reason it's not in S tier is its high price point isn't fully justified because it gets surrounded by infantry, it is weak to archers, it's weak to artillery. Those things just keep it out of being S tier. It is still A, it is still very good. It can stop a lot of things from fucking with it, but it doesn't like to get surrounded, it doesn't like to get shot, and it's very big and easy to shoot. So, just A. Just A. Still very good. Like the Arachnarok Flinga quite a lot. And that is every artillery unit in the whole game ranked. If you like this series, say it in the comments. If you hate this series, also say it in the comments, so if enough people are like, bro, don't do this, then I won't record the other ones. Okay, bye.
Subscribe, yes.